If you want your vocals to pop like they do in this song, then you gotta learn how to use compression. Today I'm gonna show 5 ways that I use compression to make my vocals pop and sound just like they do every track that I release. So if you've been watching my channel for a while, I release music almost every Friday, and something that's very, very key in being able to confidently release music every single week is to really have your vocal production down, and just in general, your whole workflow and process. So today we're gonna focus specifically on the vocals and what I do with compression to make them sound good in every single song and find the right place to sit in every mix. If you hear pops in the background, there's some fireworks going on outside, so my apologies in advance. All right, let's jump into it. The first thing you need to know about compressing vocals is that you need more than one compressor. Now, this is referred to as serial compressing throughout your vocal chain, and there's a reason why everybody does it. And if you've ever heard a song that's been professionally mixed, the vocals have more than one compressor on them. And in fact, if you look at the way that studios use their analog hardware, they're usually running their vocals through a couple of compressors before it even gets in the box. You want to do the same thing when you're mixing in your DAW. So you're going to start with one compressor, kind of get some of the peaks tamed, very, very subtle, then another compressor, then another compressor, and then another compressor if necessary. Each compressor is going to do a little bit that goes a long way, and it works a lot better than having one compressor that's trying to compress your entire vocal by itself. The reason this makes a difference is because your first compressor is going to basically narrow down the dynamic range just a little bit and tame some of those peaks. And then the next one is going to tame them a little bit more. And then the next one is going to tame them a little bit more. So then it gets you to a lot more even type waveform. And then your final compressor is really going to shine and not be working too hard because the peaks and the valleys are not that far from each other by the time it gets to that compressor. So I'll show you kind of how I'm using them here in my vocal chain. All I have going on here is a lead vocal and 2 dubs, one panned all the way left and one panned all the way right. We're just going to be messing with the lead vocal here, and I'll show you exactly how I'm using compressors on this. Let's talk about the actual compressors on here. The first compressor I use here is the CLA 76, and I have it on the Blackie mode. These are my settings. This is my initial compressor. This is the first compressor that's happening on my vocal chain. So here's my vocal chain all the way up to the first compressor. So without the first compressor. Yo te dije que yo estaba muy enamorada de tu mirada. Y cuando veo tus mensajes, baby, ya tú sabes, vamos pa la playa. So I turn on the compressor halfway through, and you can already see it's doing wonders to kind of get it to a little bit louder volume, something that we can actually listen to. That's all that this compressor is doing, just a little bit. Then we have a multi-band compressor. This is something that I feel a lot of beginners forget to do and don't see the immediate value until later in their production career. So we've got our multi-band compressor. This is just the stock one in Logic. There are so many different multi-band compressors. This one works just fine. Essentially, you want to channel in different frequency ranges in the vocal and manage those peaks and sibilants in different areas as needed. And essentially what you're doing is applying a compressor to a specific frequency range of your vocal recording. So now you have a lot more control over what's being compressed. So I'll show you before and after. Yo te dije que yo estaba muy enamorada de tu mirada. Y cuando veo tus mensajes, baby, ya tú sabes, vamos pa la playa. So what we hear in this is that we're taming some of the sibilants in the high end, and we're adding a lot of that mid-range, which is where you get a lot of that perceived loudness from a vocal. The next compressor I add here is RVox. If you've been watching my channel, for years I've been talking about this plugin. This plugin is just magic. I love adding it to vocals, but you can use it for all sorts of things. But for vocals, it really, really shines. Just some minor compression here. I'll show you before and after. Te dije que yo estaba muy enamorada de tu mirada. Y cuando veo tus mensajes, baby, ya tú sabes, vamos pa la playa. So it already is sounding a lot more glued together. So you'll notice that even though we're only using a little bit of RVox, it's going a long way because we've already used the CLA 76, we've already used a multi-band compressor, and now RVox is just coming in to kind of clean things up even more and give us a little bit more loudness. Last compressor that I add to this is also part of the Renaissance suite in Waves, but this one has has more control, so you can use the attack and the release. Also doing very little here, doing some gain, but you'll see the before and after. This is kind of the finishing touch compressor to my vocal.
Yo te dije que yo estaba muy enamorada de tu mirada. Y cuando veo tus mensajes, baby, ya tú sabes, vamos pa' la playa.
So that is my vocal chain all the way up to all of the compressors. Obviously, I've got some de-essing happening after this, some additional correction and EQ. The last thing that I really like to do is I actually get all of my vocals and put them into a vocal bus or a stack track, and then add another compressor to that bus. And that compressor, typically, lately I've been using H-Comp to do that, but you can use any compressor. You can even use the stock compressor inside of Logic. The idea here is to add a little bit more glue to your vocals as a whole. So when you're compressing them all and running them all through the same compressor, it makes them feel a little bit more glued together. So I really, really like doing that as the final compressor for all of my vocals. So that's serial compression. The next compression tip I have is parallel compression. And essentially what this is you're going to put a compressor on a bus, you're going to send your vocals to that bus, and typically you're trying to get a little bit more beefiness out of your vocal when you do parallel compression, but you can use any settings you want in that compressor that goes to the bus. The idea behind it is that then when you're using the mix bus, you can mix it into taste. So typically what I do is if I feel like my vocals are still not hitting right or not popping, parallel compression is something that I consider every time. So I'll put a very, very aggressive compressor on a bus, send the vocal to that bus, and then use the mix knob to mix it in. And what it does is it adds a little bit more of that kind of mid-range and grunginess to your vocal that adds a little bit more perceived volume too. For this specific vocal, I didn't have to do that, but another way to really get those vocals to pop is to do upward compression. We know that when we're compressing, you're typically getting the peaks of your waveform and getting them a little bit closer to your valleys so you have a little bit more consistency. Now, what upward compression is when you're getting the valleys and raising them up to be a little bit closer to the peaks. So kind of compression, but a little bit backwards. And the plugin that I like to use for that is called MV2 from Waves. This is what the plugin looks like, and it is super easy to use. Essentially, what you're doing is playing with this knob here to reach the threshold of what part of that lower part of the vocal you want to compress. So if I were to add it to these vocals right now, this is what it would sound like. So without it.
Yo te dije que yo estaba muy enamorada de tu mirada. Y cuando veo tus mensajes, baby, ya tú sabes, vamos pa' la playa.
So you see, you get a lot more loudness out of the vocal. This is a great way to get a little bit more out of your vocal, especially when you feel like it's getting lost in the mix and you've already done what you can. Upward compression is a great hack, and this is one of the easiest plugins to do that with. Okay, another way to use compression to get your vocals to pop is to use compressors that add a specific characteristic or style to your vocals. And at first you might not notice when you start using compressors, but every compressor has a little bit of a unique sound, especially if they're modeled after hardware. Let me show you what I mean. When I added H-Comp to my vocal bus, and there's actually a knob here that says analog, and it has 4 different settings. Now, I'm showing you this particular compressor because it actually shows you different styles within the same compressor, but you'll see from one compressor to the next, even with the stock compressor in Logic, which let me pull that up here, you'll notice that there are all these different types of compressors, and each and every one of them sounds different. If you want to get a better idea of what these sound like, then test it out for yourself. Go ahead and put a vocal through it and actually put your settings and then swap between compressors, and you'll notice that they all sound unique. They all have their own little sound to it. They're all modeled after different types of hardware, and so they have different sounds to them. With H-Comp, it puts them all here in 4 knobs. So I actually like using H-Comp because I just throw it on there and then I just switch to the knob that I like, and I know what works well with my own vocals. So I like to put that on the bus. So Find compressors that you feel complement the style that you're going for, and actually experiment with a bunch of compressors, even the stock ones, because you might be surprised that all you have to do is switch which compressor you're actually using as far as what it's modeled after, and your mix will sound totally different. The last tip for compression to get your vocals to really pop and sound professional is actually just a little bit of work before you throw your compressor on it. When you look at your vocal and you look at the waveform, you're obviously gonna have peaks and valleys. Now, you're not gonna see any major peaks and valleys here because this was recorded pretty consistently in volume. But let's say if we zoom in here, let's assume that these peaks were way too high. Let's say that they were up here and then the rest of your vocal was down here. You would obviously want to tame those. What you would wanna do is tame those peaks manually before you add any sort of compression, so that essentially your compressor is not working hard on those top peaks and is actually focused on something that will make a bigger difference. Now, the easiest way to adjust the gain on those peaks is to actually just go into the flex pitch and select the notes or area that you want to adjust. And with the bottom left button here, you can actually toggle the gain. So you can make something louder, you can make it lower, but essentially it's a way to micro adjust the volume within your performance so that it's exactly how you want it. And that way your compressors have to work less when you have them on your vocal. So there you have it, guys. That's 5 ways to use compression to make sure your vocals sound professional and pop in the mix. If you like this video, make sure to hit that thumbs up. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss future videos. And as always, if you ever have any questions or want to see more content, check me out on Spotify, Instagram, TikTok. Keep making beats.